Welcome to Biscuits and SEC's Week 10 preview show, where we're going to talk about all the SEC action. Well, at least some of the SEC action. We're probably going to dunk on Michigan a little bit, which has become a key part of the show. And we're going to ask the question, and you can participate down in the chat below. Who is going to have the most impactful weekend, Jackson Dart, Jaden Daniels, or Carson Beck? Just put a comment down below and or in the chat if you want to as well. So I'm here with Hammer. I'm here with Boss Man. This day, SEC has great games at 11, 2:30, and 7. All the other conferences just have the weekend off, Alex.
Well, that's typical. We're pretty used to that in the SEC. Just watching what we got going on and maybe glancing at another game here or there, just to make sure we're keeping an eye on the playoff positioning. But for the most part, the playoff runs through the SEC, as we all know.
Hammer, I have YouTube TV, and one of the most game-changing things that I've discovered on YouTube TV is the quad boxes. And you can just on college football Saturdays, it's just quad boxes up unless Ole Miss is playing.
Yeah, I have YouTube TV as well, and that's been awesome. I mean, in years past, I would either wheel in another TV or have another game up on my laptop. I was doing it the Hard Knocks way, as most people did, multiple screens. But the quad box is nice. Matter of fact, I think it was Sunday night, maybe Monday night. I was watching the NFL game of the night and the World Series on the same screen at the same time, and it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's a game changer. And if you'd have told me 10 years ago that this is what cord cutting was eventually going to get me, I would have said thank you. Because all the other crap is just crap, but that quad box almost makes it worth it. So let's start in the games this weekend. There's 3 major games, and honestly, we'll just go in chronological order. The first game is Texas A&M at Ole Miss. Now, you can see what I'm wearing. I'm as biased as they come. Homer is in the name when it comes to the Locked On Ole Miss brand. So you can everybody imagine what I'm going to say. But I do want to say this before we get started. Lane has just been on one this week, and just in like rarefied air form, Alex.
He has. The quotes coming out of Oxford have been pretty funny, especially kind of if you know the history between Lane and Jimbo. They obviously don't like each other. There's bad blood there. Not exactly sure where it comes. Lane obviously just doesn't think he's a good coach. As an Aggie myself, it's been funny to see. Lane Kiffin to us is, he's just kind of a funny coach that makes some funny things, and we're sick of losing to him, frankly. But we can laugh at the jokes that he's making. We're also kind of sick of Jimbo Fisher ourselves in College Station. So, some of the quotes I was talking to some folks about it today, just about the things he was saying and the underhanded, subtle jabs that he's been leveling Jimbo's way, and sometimes overtly as well. Talking about how this is the best 5-3 team they've ever played. You would think that the other team on the other side should be the top 10 team. The scheme is so much better this year on offense than it was last year. And then on the other side, too, Jimbo Fisher coming back and has been saying, he was asked about Lane Kiffin and the job that he's done at Ole Miss, and he just said, yeah, he does a good job. That was all he said. That's a quote. So it's, that there's no love lost between these two, which to me is partly why you love college football. It's partly the egos, the coaches, the storylines. So going into this game, that just makes it all the more fun.
It reminds me of, when was it, in the late 90s or something, like Philip Fulmer, or it was in the 2000s. He didn't want to come to Alabama to media days because they were going to subpoena him for something that they claimed he was cheating. And it's almost as ridiculous as that, really.
Yeah, this is a ridiculous league.
Yeah, that's the SEC. It's total madness every weekend. Like Alex said, the coaches, the back and forth jabs, that's what makes it great. And look, I love a coach who is humble and is very effusive in his praise. I respect it. But in terms of entertainment, stuff like this is better. People that don't like each other going toe-to-toe on the field is better. It's better entertainment. It gets fans engaged, and it's awesome all the way around, which is part of the reason that Lane Kiffin, I think, is so well-liked by media members, by a lot of fans, is because he creates engagement. He gets people interested, and he ruffles feathers often. I mean, this is not the first week that his press conferences have made waves. We don't have to go back into, the Alabama stuff or really any week, but every week, his press conferences are entertaining, and it's always funny to see what he has to say about an upcoming opponent, because he's gonna slip something in, whether it's a jab or a troll. He's going to get his 2 cents in there, and it's, like I said, it's entertaining every week.
Yeah, and next year Ole Miss plays Oklahoma, who the offensive coordinator is Jeff Lebby, who he did not leave Oxford on the best of terms. So I imagine that one's going to be a fun thing as well. And then you've got I've got some A&M people on here, so I can say this. You've got the ego of Texas coming into the SEC. and to just see how they handle everything that's going to go on, because they and Oklahoma have been the 2 teams in that league forever. The only 2 teams that's mattered. Now they're going to come into the SEC, and there's 6 teams that have just as much of a big stick as they do.
I'm excited to watch what that looks like inside the SEC room, and especially too, and Hank, you can get to it in a second, but especially too when you're talking about what the SEC has meant and how it came together and how we vote on things together. We come to a decision together. There's history there. Of course there's bad blood between the schools sometimes, but at the end of the day, it's the SEC, and it's like this. Adding Texas to that mix, I don't know if it's going to go like that. And that's what Aggies were saying from day one, is you better watch out, what you let into the hen house, because this is why we left the Big 12.
Well, the difference honestly is they're big. They had their biggest ally. They made allies with Oklahoma, and they just knew that they could fight with Oklahoma against the whole league. The whole league, they could stand up, and it's like, hey, we're the big 2 things. Yep. They're going to try that in the SEC, and A&M has more money than God. Alabama is the SEC office is in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida. All of these just act like they're big deals because they are. LSU, and Texas is going to come in, walk in their $6,000 jacket and their 10-gallon hat, and walk in and start talking like they're dealing with Kansas State and Iowa State and those guys. And Florida and LSU and Alabama is just going to say, okay, rookie, sit down. We got this. We'll let you know when it's your turn to talk.
100%. It's going to be, I think, both on and off the field, a humbling experience for those 2 programs. Not that they won't be successful or that they won't win, but we know on the field it's going to be more difficult. Whether they can weather that storm and actually win remains to be seen, but it's going to be more difficult to win consistently. And then, like you said, off the field, because they have been the biggest brands in that league for over a decade, and even since they started that league, they were the biggest brands. A&M joining the SEC bolstered their brand massively. So seeing how they interact in the SEC is going to be awesome. I think media days next year, and maybe even the year after they've been in it for a year, are going to be, again, super entertaining, must watch. It's going to be really, really fun.
And I don't think they're going to be able to do it, but if they would just drop the ego and take the competition and all the good that comes with coming to the SEC, Texas would be a scary, scary brand on the national scene, but they can't get out of their own way. It's just ego. And I don't think that's going to stop at all. And you're going to have, honestly, a little bit of what Tennessee is. In Tennessee and Texas, there's a lot in common there. And there's the ego and the false sense of grandeur that everybody just enjoys when there's a 6-6 thrown up by the Tennessee Volunteers because of the way they act whenever they win 8 games.
Yeah, I think I think that's going to be Texas coming in. There's definitely a sense of grandeur, and I think that the move to the SEC only made their heads bigger, if that was even possible. So
should be great. I'm so looking forward to that. Oklahoma coming to the Grove. I'm probably going to go there and do a remote broadcast from Ole Miss and Oklahoma. Anyway, this Texas A&M and Ole Miss game, I do think that this is a 1990s style SEC football game disguised as a 2020 spread offense game. This is going to be a front seven game. You've got A&M's defensive line and front seven that's leading the nation in sacks and tackles for loss, but then you have Ole Miss's that nobody thinks about. They're 4th in sacks and they're 8th in tackles for loss. And I think Ole Miss's offensive line's a little bit better than Texas A&M's, which means the line plays kind of a wash. So you've got some original old style football things like, who do you trust more, Jackson Dart or Max Johnson? Because you have weapons on the outside. And I think that's going to be the difference.
I agree with that. I think I was thinking the exact same thing writing our previews today for Biscuits and SEC.com, which the one thing to me, I think that Ole Miss does have a bit of an advantage. A&M's got that incredible defensive line like you talked about. And they've done a good job this year getting to the backfield. But there's a couple things that if you're an A&M fan, you've kind of been, a little squeamish about sometimes. The run defense has been really good for the most part, but then you play a team like Tennessee who relies on the run game and does well in the run game, and they run for 250 yards on you. So that's one thing I think that Aggie should be worried about a little bit is that Jackson Dart's going to be handing the ball off to Quinshon Judkins. That running game, Lane Kiffin's going to try and get it going. I don't expect them to run for 250 yards like Tennessee does. I think Tennessee's offensive line is better than Ole Miss's. Ole Miss does have a good offensive line. So I still think they're going to be able to run the ball on A&M more than most people might think. But I do think that, like you talked about, it's going to come down to Max Johnson or Jackson Dart. I really think that this game comes down to who can actually make a couple more plays in the passing game. And both teams have great weapons on the outside. They've got plenty of offensive firepower. The thing to me is I just trust Jackson Dart to make a couple more plays and those weapons from Ole Miss to make a couple more plays. And I don't trust the A&M secondary to be able to stop them. We've seen the A&M secondary be leaky in multiple games this season when they don't have that defensive line, making a push and in the face of the quarterback every down. So, and I think Jackson Dart is really coming into his own. So I think he's going to be able to have some success against this A&M secondary. And then when you turn it around on the other side, like you mentioned, Ole Miss 4th in sacks. They've got a solid defensive front, and A&M has struggled in every single game this year against teams even that don't have a very good defensive front. Their offensive line is one of the worst in FBS, kind of up there with Alabama, which just makes it incredible that Alabama's doing what they're doing, but A&M hasn't been able to overcome that. So I'm thinking Ole Miss in this game. I think Ole Miss is going to end up covering, and I like them by touchdown, maybe 10.
Okay, Hammer, the one thing that's in my head, and the reason I was leaning the direction I keep thinking about, I think the quarterback's last name is DeBerry, and Jalen Milroe looked like a super passer against going up there and just picked on him all day. You know that Lane Kiffin is going to put Trey Harris on that side of the field and say, hey, y'all need to pay attention to this. And if you don't pay attention to that, okay, we have Quinshon, and then we have these other pieces over here. So it's kind of pick your poison. Don't you think?
100%. I think, honestly, this game is going to be pretty similar to the last couple of years with A&M and Ole Miss. I think, in terms of comparing it just to last year's game, I don't think, Ole Miss is going to run for over 300 yards. And I also don't think A&M's quarterback is going to throw for 4 touchdowns like Wigman did last year. So I think it'll be a little bit different in terms of, how these teams are scoring. But I just, to go back to your first point, I think this game is won in the trenches. And I don't trust the A&M offensive line, especially on the road, to block. I think you're probably going to see a handful of pre-snap penalties, and I think you're going to see a lot of missed assignments from running backs, from offensive linemen, and you're going to see guys running free because the jury is out on the A&M offensive line that they, are not very good, especially when you throw an exotic look at them. And Pete Golding is, a smart defensive coordinator who's going to exploit that. So that's where I think the difference is here. And your point about the Ole Miss offense, that's one of the things I respect the most about Lane Kiffin. The way he runs it is he will exploit a matchup until you stop it. Right? He is going to go to his playmakers, and his main goal is to get the ball in space to his playmakers. Or you have to prove to him that you can stop it, and then he goes to plan B, plan C, and on down the line. And as good as the A&M front seven is, you're not going to get pressure on every single passing down, no matter how good you are. So there's going to be opportunities for Jackson Dart to make plays downfield. And the A&M secondary so far, I think has shown that if the opposing quarterback has time, they don't hold up in coverage very well. So I think I'm on, Alex's side here, and I'm sure your side here, Stephen, where I think Ole Miss wins this game. I think it's going to be a very close, competitive 4-quarter ball game, but A&M hasn't won a road game since 2021. So to think that they're all of a sudden going to beat a 7-1 top 10 Ole Miss team on the road is, in my opinion, just not a smart bet. I just don't think you can count on this team to execute at a level high enough to win on the road right now against a very good Ole Miss team. So I think Ole Miss wins this game. I think it's going to be, fairly low scoring, 27-20, 24-20, somewhere in there. But I just don't think this A&M team has shown us anything that makes me think they can go on the road and win a big game like this.
All right, 2 things before we move on to the next game. First of all, thank you for Caden Davis. He's just an absolutely different kicker and is a weapon. Randy Bond must be amazing. And also, okay, if you're looking for this game to get really squirrely for Ole Miss football, if you want to find a way, Ole Miss's punt game has not been very good. Anaya Smith might break a return. That is something that people need to watch as well. I think that's the way that there can be some momentum changed in the game. So let's go to Missouri at UGA, 2:30 Central Time on CBS, part of the CBS doubleheader. You got Brady Cook going down to the number 2 Georgia Bulldogs, which thoughts and prayers, Missouri, for that. The only thing that I can think of that might be a good matchup for Missouri, and we all remember the way it was last year, and we know that Georgia can sleepwalk from time to time. They're not going to after they got ranked number 2. That was just the meanest thing the playoff committee could have done to Missouri. But Brady Cook to Luther Burden. If Luther Burden can get off in the slot, and if that happens and creates matchups and kind of undoes the Georgia defense from within, that's a way that Missouri can at least score enough to keep it close. But this feels like a game to me that is going to look like the Kentucky game. Hammer.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. Missouri has been an awesome story this year. I think they are a good team. What Eli Drinkwitz has done is really impressive, but you can be a good team and still get blown out on the road in Athens. And, the one thing I think that as much as Georgia maybe has looked differently this year, or as you mentioned, Stephen, they have been known to sleepwalk through games. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They typically do not do that in a big game. And Missouri is, I can't remember what they are in the playoff, but they're a top 15 team, 13, 12.
Yeah.
12. Yeah. So this is a big game. And I don't expect Georgia to play with their food in this one. And when you look at what Missouri does well, to your point, if they're going to be in this game, Luther Burden's going to have to go over 100 yards and probably get in the end zone. Once would be solid, but multiple times, I think, for them to keep it close, because Cody Schrader, the Tigers running back, has been awesome this year, but teams just don't run the ball effectively on Georgia. And I don't quite know if the Missouri defense is going to be able to turn Georgia over, because that I think is what they're going to have to do. I think Georgia, without turning the ball over, is going to move the ball effectively on Missouri. And, when you think back to the games where Georgia has struggled a little bit, especially the Auburn game, they had a couple of really costly turnovers, and that's really what kept Auburn in the game. So as long as Georgia takes care of the ball, I really don't see how Mizzou keeps it close. And Carson Beck has been playing excellent football as of late, so I don't expect him at home to put the ball in dangerous positions. So I think Georgia wins and covers this game. It's just one of those games where the great stories that we love in college football, like Missouri, come back to reality when they get matched up with a team like Georgia, who just has glass eaters on both sides of the ball, who are ready to destroy any and all things in front of them when they're in the right mindset, which, again, I think they will be. So I like Georgia in this one, and I like them to cover.
Hey, boss man, you know what the status symbol of 2023 is in college football?
What's that?
That is being good enough to where Georgia takes you seriously and actually gets up for your game. So that if you get blown out by Georgia, that means you're a pretty good football team. If they just play around like they did with Auburn, they go to it. So this is a game that the only thing that in my head, the way I think of it, is Georgia's sitting over there. Kirby Smart has them all in military ranks. They're all putting war paint on. There's like Mongolian throat music playing in the background. And Georgia's just getting ready to go to war, and they're going to take it out on Eli Drinkwitz. Am I wrong?
No, it feels like if you've ever seen the New Zealand All Blacks do their haka dance, something like that, where they're going to come out just absolutely ready to go. The other thing, too, with Georgia is that they've been, they started out slow in first halves during the early part of the year. People were really worried about Carson Beck and, how he's looking. He gets off to slow starts and then he turns it on. But they have turned it on. And they look like a machine. It's all seeming to come together here late in the year. And Carson Beck is looking every bit the part of, a national championship type quarterback. He's got all the weapons, even without Brock Bowers. Now he's finding Ra Thomas. He's finding Dominic Lovett. He's finding Oscar Delp. So even without Brock Bowers, they got plenty of weapons all around him. And then that defense is just, as stingy as it gets. So if people have been watching the show, people have been reading our previews and everything in our preseason preview. I've been on the Missouri bandwagon. I thought that this was the year that they were going to break through that 500 ceiling that they've had under Eli Drinkwitz. That's already happened. And I think they're still going to have a great season. But, yeah, this Georgia team is just too much, especially at home right now. I think this one's going to be a 20-point win. I think this one's going to be over, by the middle of the third quarter at the latest, probably. And that's saying someone, again, who's been on the Mizzou bandwagon for most of the year. So, yeah, I just think that Georgia overpowers them. Georgia by 20. Georgia covers.
Yeah, and before we get out of here, Georgia like minus 16. I don't know if I wouldn't lay those in the first half for Georgia. I'm seriously thinking that Georgia's just about to go off in this situation. I think it's coming. Now,
and also remember last year, right? Mizzou had them on the ropes. They remember that. They're pissed off about the number 2 ranking that they just got. I mean, there's a lot of things that are now stacking up against Mizzou, and Mizzou's got that number 12 ranking like we talked about. So there's a whole bunch of bulletin board material for Kirby Smart and the Dogs, and you never want to be walking into Athens when that's going on.
It's like Eli Drinkwitz. What's that movie? No Good, Rotten, Totally Bad Day or whatever. And yeah, that's kind of what Eli Drinkwitz is in store for as well. All right, so let's turn to the game that I'm assuming that everybody in the chat wants to know about, and it's LSU and Alabama. It is the primetime CBS game. It was the last one. Honestly, it's been the primetime CBS game so much in the last 15 years. It's probably good that it is the last CBS game. Now, I've been waiting on Alabama to lose games. And you can see by my chest, I'm an absolute homer in that situation, to where if Alabama is going to lose 2 games, they need to start because there's only 3 left. So I'm going to pick LSU just because I'm hoping. And also LSU can be really good. And I'm not sure that Jalen Milroe can even score enough against that LSU defense. But I'm going to go with LSU Hammer.
That's bold. Look, they're certainly capable. I mean, we saw it last year, and what we've seen from them so far this year is, in my opinion, the best offense in the country. So they're capable of going in there and winning. Jaden Daniels is playing incredibly good football right now. Malik Neighbors, Kyron Lacey. I mean, they have weapons all over the field. What I'm interested to see is how they can run the ball in this game. Not Jaden Daniels. I think Jaden Daniels, at this point, look, he's really good with his legs, and in most games he's going to rip off a couple of chunk runs. But I'm interested to see if they can get their backs going, because we've seen time and time again in these games, even Ole Miss, it happened to them earlier this year, right, where they just couldn't run the ball with their running backs. And that puts you in a really tough spot, especially on the road at night in Tuscaloosa, to where it's all on your quarterback. And Jaden Daniels is capable of doing that, but that's just not the position you want to be in a game like this. You want to at least be able to get some breathing room with your ground game. You want to be able to stay on track and not get behind the change and be forced into 3rd and longs. And ultimately, it's a home game for Alabama. And I know I said this earlier when they lost to Texas, but I think, we've seen enough from Bama lately to know that they've evolved quite a bit. Their offense is not great, but it's better than it was in that game. Jalen Milroe is more confident. And
their defense is elite.
Yeah, their defense is elite. So I don't trust the LSU defense very much in this situation. I think there will be big plays to be had for Milroe in the passing game. And at this point, it's going to be a great matchup because it's good on good. The Bama defense is elite. The LSU offense is elite. And I just think in this situation, the revenge game, everything Alabama has on the line. I know LSU is still playing for the SEC West, and if they win this game, they would be really in the driver's seat. But Bama still got playoff hopes on the line. They only have one loss, so they control their own destiny. I'm just not picking against Nick Saban in this spot. Now, is it going to be a field goal game? Is LSU going to cover? I think that's a pretty good bet, but I don't think they're going to win outright in this one. And I think, you're looking at a pretty entertaining 31-28, 30-27 type of a game. So, look, at the end of the day, I'm just pumped for this game. A&M is out of it, the team I root for. So I don't have a dog in this hunt, but it's going to be really, really fun to see this game. Brian Kelly's first time at Bryant-Denny. I mean, it's going to be awesome. So I like Alabama, but just really can't wait for the matchup and to see, how these teams fare.
Yeah, and my post-game show after the Texas A&M Ole Miss game, I'll be done. So I'll actually be able to sit down and enjoy college football. And normally that's Pac-12 after dark for me. I do think that this game will be decided by LSU's tackles against Dallas Turner and I think Chris Braswell. How LSU does there, if LSU can block that somewhat, I mean, you have Jaden Daniels, you have those weapons, but I think they need to affect Jaden Daniels quickly so that it doesn't become just a sitting back there and it turns into like a Johnny Manziel type situation, because so many teams are scared to come after him because he can absolutely fry you. But I think Dallas Turner and Braswell, if they rush right and they don't rush past him, stay in front of him, I think Alabama's defense might be able to do what no other defense can do.
Now, FSU did it a little bit, in that first game, and we saw kind of what happened in that second half and how that looked. I think Alabama will be bringing pressure, and I think that they're going to be able to affect Jaden Daniels. And like you said, hopefully, he scrambles around. Now he can throw the ball on the run. He's shown that in his career, so it's not like that's the end of the world if he's got to run around. But if he's doing that all night, then it definitely advantage Alabama. I was writing our previews today, and we haven't posted them yet, so I'm still kind of on the fence. I mean, to me, this game, who knows? It's obviously advantage Alabama because you got those couple of things. Night game, Bryant-Denny Stadium, and then revenge game, like Hank touched on, for Nick Saban. We talked about that earlier this year. That was my focal point when we talked about Alabama versus Tennessee. You don't bet against Nick Saban in revenge games. And I did look at the record and confirmed it. I'm forgetting now, but it was right around now. I think it's 22 or 23-2 in revenge games since he was at LSU. That's pretty much all you need to know. We could talk X's and O's and everything and all these other, what are the matchups? What are this? What are that? Nick Saban is 22 or 23-2 since his time at LSU. He just doesn't lose these games. And especially, in my opinion, against Brian Kelly, a guy who's gone up against in Notre Dame, a guy he went up against, at LSU last year, and who got him in LSU in a game that they really needed to win to stay in the hunt. So I'm not going to bet against Nick Saban in this game. The one thing that cannot happen for Alabama is to get into a shootout. If this game turns into a shootout, it's LSU, and LSU will win by 7-10 if it gets into a shootout. But I don't think that's going to be the case. This is the best defense that LSU has played all season. They've scored on everybody they've played against, so they're going to score some points on Alabama. But I think Hank is right on the money. And also, by the way, before I make my pick, you've got Zy Alexander out in the secondary this week for LSU. LSU secondary has been banged up most of the year. Now you have a starting corner who's going to be out, and you also have multiple corners who could be starting or who would be in the rotation with Deuce Chestnut and Denver Harris, who haven't been playing for weeks for undisclosed reasons, which obviously disciplinary. So that secondary is getting very thin for LSU, which doesn't bode well. You got Isaiah Bond, you got Jalen Milroe figuring things out at quarterback. He's made some great throws over the last few weeks, and if he figures it out and turns it on, which I expect him, I think he'll have a couple touchdown passes in this one. Everyone does against LSU's defense. So I'm going to take Alabama as well. I think it's going to be a close game. I think they can get into the 30s, but I'll say they win by 5, 7, 8, something like that.
Yeah, and for me, it's a situation where there's 3 conference games left for Alabama, and there's no way that Ole Miss can possibly make it to Atlanta without LSU winning this football game, because there's a chance that Alabama goes down to Jordan-Hare and there's some sort of horseshoe magic. We've all seen that happen. But there's no way that they're losing to Kentucky and Auburn, so they have to. LSU's the other team that could get them. So we'll see. And Ole Miss has Georgia, and there's so much water left to go under the bridge. But yeah, I'm not picking the game out of analysis. I'm picking the game out of hope, essentially, when it comes to Alabama and LSU, just pure fandom. So we'll see what's going on. All I know is it's going to be a great game, though. It's going to be a great game, and I'm looking forward to watching it. It's the game that honestly got my wife into football, because she just liked old man football. She fell in love after watching the 9-6 game. Seriously,
old school, man. Yeah,
yeah. That after the 9-6 game, she was hooked on football, and she's been locked in.
Maybe Brian Kelly should start eating grass like Les Miles used to do, and that might give him the mojo that they need.
Yeah, and so pretty good. So before we get out of here today, we can't get out without talking about and dunking on Michigan a little bit, because since we talked to each other last week, it's even gotten more ridiculous. The only thing that could surprise me at this point is if we found out that he was renting a blimp, or maybe he had figured out how to do a hologram that he could physically look at. I don't know. That's the only way this could get weirder. I don't think that Jim Harbaugh can survive this at this point. Either whether he knew or not, it's just not relevant. It's just at the point where there has to be an example made. And I understand that Michigan is one of the sweethearts of Fox. And right now, if you're counting on the Big Ten to punish Michigan, knowing that the Fox is the major sponsor and how much they would lose if Michigan fell out, you realize that nothing is going to happen. But the NCAA has to do something, because this is almost SMU-like in its brazenness at this point.
Yeah, it is. I think so. first of all, if the folks watching us tonight haven't been following along, I totally understand. You've probably caught bits and pieces, but it seems like there's a new piece of news that comes out on Twitter like every 15 minutes about where Connor Stallions was, on this date, and he better have an alibi or he's guilty, before we've even charged him in the Big Ten court of law. So yeah, it's just been wild. I mean, the more and more now we're talking about, social media gets a hold of clips that he may have been at the Central Michigan versus Michigan State game. Was he wearing Ray-Bans that have, the little
like the digital camera? Yeah.
Yeah. He was wearing Nike shoes when all the rest of them were wearing Adidas, on the Central Michigan sideline. So you just can't even hardly keep up with how much is coming out. The floodgates are obviously open. Now all these Big Ten schools, whoever has any sort of possible potential dirt is leaking it either to ESPN to take a shot at Fox. They're leaking it to, Josh Pate. They're leaking it to any of these guys who are just tweeting it far and wide. I think the big thing with the writing is on the wall, and you can see it with how Michigan has reacted to this. And Michigan pulled Jim Harbaugh's contract offer, which would have made him the highest paid coach in the Big Ten a couple days ago, or what seems like, 3 weeks ago at this point, but it was probably like 4 days ago. And I wrote it in our newsletter. So yeah, it's I think Jim Harbaugh's gone to the NFL after this year. Truth be told, I think there's a very obvious landing spot for him, and that's in his old other home of Chicago. It's unfortunate for college football, but it's also obvious when you look at the record, right? It's like the record up until this point of now when the alleged sign stealing started was not that great. It was good, but not great. And then now we're looking at a top 3, top 5 team playoffs, all this stuff. The whole stuff with South Carolina. I mean, it's just a total mess. I don't see how he survives it. I have a feeling that he's going to get what they call transfired in some industries, which means they're going to transfer him out and give him the opportunity to basically resign. And I think he'll either do that or take a job before that's even possible.
Hammer, if you look at it, he talked about the records and everything. And yes, before all this happened, Jim Harbaugh was on the hottest of hot seats. And then all of a sudden he's in the playoff getting boat raced by Georgia and TCU and whoever's going to blow them out this year. It's an interesting situation because if you look at like third down and fourth down conversions, their offense wasn't very good at converting third down and fourth downs, and their defense was very bad at giving them up. And it's just completely flipped. They're dominating on third and fourth down now. Like just flipped a switch. We figured out how to do it. Yeah. And it probably has to do with those hand signals that are on that sheet of paper that's on the sideline next to the person that you didn't know was doing it.
Yeah, look, there's an old saying. I believe it goes, where there's smoke, there's fire. And there's so much smoke going on coming out of Ann Arbor right now that there's a fire. We'll probably never know the true details of who knew what and all that nonsense. And there's been enough scandals in college football that we know how these coaches handle these things. It's all plausible deniability. And I didn't know, what was going on, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, I don't think this ends well for Michigan. To your point earlier on, Stephen, about, who's going to step in and maybe it's the NCAA that needs to, which it is them that needs to do that. But like I said, I think I said this last
5
week.
years from now.
Right. This is not, you cannot count on the NCAA for anything. And I think this is going to end up playing out similar to what happened with the Houston Astros, where whatever happens this season to Michigan, whether they win the national championship or, end up losing, who knows, but they're going to play out this season. Stuff is going to continue coming out whenever the investigation is finalized. It's essentially going to be too late. They can vacate wins. Nobody cares about vacated wins. There's not a ton they can do, unfortunately, I don't think, aside from stepping in now, which, as we just said, the NCAA can't be counted on to do that. I don't expect them to do that. So I think Harbaugh is gone one way or the other at the end of the year. I think this is a massive black eye to Michigan, probably fairly long-term, just in terms of their reputation. But on the field this year, I don't expect it to really make a difference other than potentially them not being able to steal signs moving forwards because this guy is, suspended and presumably no longer attending other people's games and buying tickets in his own name. So
I don't know if we can presume that.
We might not be able to. I mean, like you said, the brazenness that they have already showed, it wouldn't surprise me if they just continued doing whatever they're doing and send some other staffer out there. But, at the end of the day, it does stink for college football. And I hope this leads to them putting the intercom microphone in the helmet so we don't have to deal with this anymore. And just in general, I mean, you look at the game and every college football game you see, there's 3 guys wearing different colored shirts signaling. They've got the sheets up behind them that are black so you can't see it from certain angles. I mean,
it'd be cheaper to do it.
Yeah, it's silly. It's total nonsense that they have to do this, regardless of this specific scandal. We shouldn't have to be doing this. I mean, guys, it's 2023. We can figure this out without having all this dancing and signs, of memes on the sideline that mean a certain thing. It's complete nonsense, and getting the intercoms in the helmets solves it all. So hopefully we get that out of this and move the sport forward into the 20th century a little bit. But it's college football. They're slow on a lot of things, so we'll see.
So the NCAA is hoping that Michigan loses to either Penn State or Ohio State, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Ohio State might get them.
Yeah.
I have a feeling they may get got.
Ryan Day is on a warpath. All right, he's already taken down Lou Holtz. He will take down anyone he can find.
He's going after Santa Claus next. Got your number. I've got your number. He agrees Methuselah. Ryan Day's the tough guy. He goes after men over 80 and kids under 10.
That's right.
So
he's your guy.
But I mean, Penn State's fraudulent. I mean, you can't count on them to beat Michigan because you saw them against Ohio State. They looked like Iowa's offense whenever they were faced with a semi-talented team. So it's really just Ohio State. So the whole country is going to be rooting for them the way that essentially they root against the Houston Astros.
Yeah, definitely. Which is weird for Ohio State because they are typically rooted against. As Ryan Day was, again, very quick to point out, he was screaming at Lou Holtz and then he was screaming Ohio versus everybody or whatever, which is pretty true. I mean, I don't like Ohio State. I don't know many people that do unless you have ties to that program. So they're very used to being hated. It'll be an interesting situation for them to be, feel the whole country rooting for them.
What's the whole thing? It's like the thing that everybody knows most about Ohio is they're most famous for people leaving it. To go do something great with their life. So I get it's Ohio versus the world because whoever was stuck there, that's something else, right?
Yeah,
I mean, Cleveland is in Ohio and they've set their own river on fire like 6 times.
Exactly.
It's absolutely nuts. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in tonight. Thanks, Boss Man. Thanks, Hammer, for doing that. We do this every Thursday night at about 8:15. We just do the SEC weekend preview, and you have my other live streams that you can catch on this channel. On Wednesday night is SEC After Dark with Corey Burton, Jake Thomas, and Jeb Beecham. And then on my Locked On Ole Miss channel, I live stream Shark Tank Live on Tuesday night, and I do pre- and post-game live streams as well. So that's opportunities to interact. John knows very well about that. Although, John, we miss you, buddy. We need you back on SEC After Dark. Anyway, we will catch everybody later, and take care and enjoy the weekend. All the other conferences, you have the day off, except for Bedlam. I want to see what happens there.